Hi, I am Kate Mayer Mangan of Donegal, a company that is working to create solutions to help lawyers work better. Today, I'm interviewing Robbie Friedman, the CEO of Viewabill. This is part of our new series of interviews with people who are innovating in the legal profession. So welcome, Robbie. You still there?
Thanks for having me, Kate. Yeah. It's great to be here. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today because I think Viewabill is one of those interesting, disruptive technologies that could really change the way lawyers are practicing. It creates a lot of new opportunities for less contentious relationships, I think, between clients and their lawyers and lawyers who are working together. But I also find it really interesting because in reading your post, you're not just thinking about different ways of working with bills. You're thinking about working in different ways on all kinds of fronts. So let's start with one area that people seem to have a love-hate relationship with. It's everywhere, people need it, but they kind of hate it too, and that is email. So you have written about email being a terrible form of communication. What is so bad about email?
I guess at its most basic level, emails are too cheap to send. And what I think has happened over the years is we've started to use email as these just quick reach outs. And there's never any meaningful communication within two emails. There's never one single back and forth where you get the full picture and can move on with life. If you have to figure out what's actually going on in an email chain, you end up reading 45 emails, all of them fewer than 10 words, and not only is there a lot of opportunity there for miscommunication, but it's just really inefficient to have to go through so much material to figure out what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And I think I think part of what's happened also is that because everybody gets so bombarded by emails, it's become a game to just clear your plate of that email that you have sitting there. And the quicker you can just clear your plate of that email, you've done what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And that does not lend itself to efficient communication as much as it lends itself to just lots of communication.
Yeah, quality is missing. Do you think it's changing the way people are thinking because they are communicating in these little short sound bites, if you will?
It's definitely changing the way people are communicating. People don't make phone calls anymore, really. They can't write, and not that I'm some amazing writer or anything, but again, at least I'm aware of what's good, what's bad, what's clear, what's not clear, and no emails are clear. And people don't have any area where they have to be really concise, really clear, and get out of there.
Right. No, it's a big problem. So, what do you think is a better way of communicating? Old-fashioned way?
Pardon?
The old-fashioned way?
No, I think look, progress is good. Technology is good. I'm in the technology industry. I'm a firm believer in technology, but I think what comes with technology is using it properly. And email by itself, or email as a tool, there's nothing wrong with it inherently. The problem becomes when email becomes the communication ecosystem as opposed to a part of that ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Using email to communicate with outside customers, clients, that's polite because nobody wants to be blindsided by a phone call from someone they don't really know. But there's a difference between saying to somebody, hey, this is who I am, blah, 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 and let's hop on a call and continue the discussion. That's different than saying, all of our communications are going to be happening through email. We're never going to ever know each other, the end. And I think what email is really good for is initiating a conversation and, closing a conversation or delivering the end result that's come out of that communication. Right. But all the in-between stuff should be happening typically through more productive channels.
Like, so what do you do within Viewabill? Because you mentioned, you drew kind of a distinction between the outside communication, outside of your organization, and the internal communications. And I know I've read about some companies that have abolished internal emails, or they've set up policies about the kinds of emails that make sense to send internally. So what do you do within Viewabill?
So we are actually, we'll never get away from emails internally, but we're moving away from it as the main mode of communication. And one thing that we've done is anything relating to sales process or customer related items, all that communication takes place in our CRM system, so that the communication.
Sorry, just let me enter. What is that for people who don't know what a CRM?
So it's our customer relationship management database.
Okay.
I hope that's what CRM stands for. So we use a program called Salesforce.com. That's where we track all of our communications with our customers. That's where we communicate internally as to next steps. Look back at the history of this particular customer, etc. And so rather than sending emails from one person to another, which obviously has the email problem of being too cheap and unclear, it has another problem where only those two people know what's going on.
Yeah.
The rest of the company has no idea. So what we've done is, instead of sending emails, you go into Salesforce and you create what's called tasks. And it's essentially the same thing as sending an email, but it's attached to whatever context it belongs in.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's able to see it. It's much more for the common good mentality. And also it's a little bit more difficult to sign into Salesforce, create a task, etc. And I'm okay with making people pay a little bit.
So they have to think twice. And they have to think about whether this is something they really want to communicate.
Or they have to be mindful in the way they communicate. You can send an email that has 10 words that says, hey, can you call Daniel? But the next 40 emails are going to be, who's Daniel? Call about what? What are we talking about? No human conversations happen that way. But to write, to write with context and to say, this is who Daniel is, this is what I need, and to kind of present that task in a way that you can get a quick response that's meaningful and is all you need. The buck ends after that response. Setting up the email so that it's that one-on-one or, back and forth communication, then it ends, is something that people are more inclined to do if it's difficult to have the many backs and forths.
Yeah, right. Let's take this conversation to a law firm setting where we've both spent some time. As you know, a lot of the relationships in law firms are not necessarily the healthiest ones, especially when it's a very senior partner and, say, a very junior associate. It can sometimes be a lot of tension and a lot of fear in those relationships. And I have observed that oftentimes people use email kind of to avoid the emotional overlay of some of those difficult situations, difficult relationships. What advice would you have for, let's say, a junior associate who is a little bit nervous about the partner he's working with or she's working with, and maybe uses email a little bit as a shield or a wall to protect himself or herself from going into the intimidating partner's office and having these personal conversations? Do you have any advice for those people, for that kind of person?
I think every associate wants to prove their value to the firm and to the partners. And if somebody is too scared to have a personal interaction with, partner X, then email is not going to allow them to develop that relationship. Because if they're always just sending those emails and never going into the person's office, sitting down and talking, then they might be able to get their work done that particular day, but they haven't gained anything from a career perspective. They, associates need to realize that their client is the partner.
Right.
And it's not appropriate for a partner to say, I'm intimidated by my client, so I'm just going to avoid him or her. That would not fly from the firm's perspective. That's not client service, and the associates have to view it the same way. They have to want to impress their partners and create a real relationship there.
Right. And email can be a real barrier to relationship building, I think.
It's certainly used as a barrier. It's cheap.
It is cheap. I like that word, cheap. It definitely is. People use it too much. But yet it is really ubiquitous. I mean, and I, as you know, have been thinking about it from a physiological perspective of what does all this interruption and these soundbite communications do to our brains and our efficiencies, which we've talked about. So what's your take on whether using email too much and making our brains really inefficient? What's your take on how that impacts billing? Are we becoming so inefficient with all the back and forth emails that it borders on an unethical billing practice?
Yeah, I think email can certainly have ethical implications. Not necessarily from the distraction perspective, although that's one way as well, but because emails are so quick to send, receive, or whatever, I don't think it's fair to bill for such quick, low effort, tasks. So to the extent a 5-second email gets billed out for a 6-minute increment, there's certainly ethical implications there. In terms of productivity, the obligation is to bill accurately, to do the work efficiently,
right,
and for there to be some correlation between how much time you're putting in and what the fees are, right? And if you are 100% productive and your emails aren't taking 1 minute and you're billing for 6 minutes, if you're billing for how long it takes, ethically there's nothing wrong with it. That's, some people are more efficient, some people are less efficient. I don't think that different people and different sort of margins in that efficiency should cause ethical or unethical boundaries to be crossed. But I do think that if somebody is not billing or is not being productive for that hour, and they bill for an hour, then there's an issue with that.
Right.
And there's a show in Canada called This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and even though it's a half-hour show, I don't know why they say this hour, but the point of it is you watch a half-hour show, but 8 minutes of it is commercials, 22 minutes of it is TV, and it's just misleading to say that you've done this work when you are also checking Facebook, checking emails, switching your browsers 150 times. You don't bill for tinkering with your layout on your desktop.
It shouldn't. Let's hope not. But it gets back to self-awareness, like you were talking about before. You have to be paying enough attention to how you're spending your time to realize, I'm clicking out of my brief right now, and I'm going on a Facebook, and I shouldn't bill for that.
Right. And most people aren't that aware during the course of the day because, they've got 100 different things going on. And that's one of the reasons I'm so keen on contemporaneous time entry, because it forces a person to start a task, end a task, log that task, and move on to the next thing. It just becomes really difficult to do your time entries if you're touching 100 different things at once.
Right.
And so if people have to do the time entries contemporaneously, they'll make their tasks more, in line with that process.
Right. No, that makes sense. You do the brief, and then you take 30 minutes to check your email, and bill accordingly. Right.
Yeah, right. And then what ends up happening is, all your tasks become kind of compartmentalized, and you could create chunks for yourself where you can allocate your time and you can allocate what you're doing in that chunk however you want. Yeah.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right. So imagine that have a view like you do, like that. You don't love email, but you're working in a culture where email's the prevalent form of communication. You're working in a law firm, and everybody emails all the time. What suggestions would you have for somebody who, let's just say they're not in a leadership position, so they can't just come forward and say, we're going to prioritize human contact. You're not that person. What suggestions do you have for a person who would like to get away from using email so much, but who may not have the control or the power to sort of decree that that's the way the office is going to run?
So if you look how many emails a person has in one day relating to, how many emails people have relating to emails that they have, it's a lot. I have no exact figures, but I feel like sometimes all we do is write emails about emails. So for a person who has my outlook and who doesn't want to be in their emails all the time, that's the first place where they could cut back on emails. Stop or move away from the email back and forth that is clogging your inbox, and instead take it upon yourself to draft better emails that set up a situation for whoever you're sending it to so that they could reply quickly and end of story. So writing better emails and better prompts will cut down on the number of emails that you have in your inbox and let you focus on, the more important things. The more people do that, the more they'll realize that when they're getting emails, they're important. And that's a reason to check those emails.
Right.
But when everything's unimportant, it all gets mixed together.
Right. It's good advice. So I know we have to wrap up, but before we finish, tell us a little bit about what is next at Viewabill.
Sure. So we have some very exciting things going on at Viewabill, and our biggest thing that we're working on right now is we're trying to change. Our philosophy is the right information in the right place at the right time, and what we found over the past year and a half with Viewabill is that firms are sharing this real-time pre-bill information with their clients, but the firms themselves, internally, the people who have an impact on the billable activity, they have no idea what's actually happening. And one of the reasons that's the case is because historically people haven't been putting their time until the end of the month. So what are you going to manage during the course of the month? There's nothing to do. The data's not there. People's time isn't there. But with Viewabill, we're seeing people put their time in contemporaneously when there is somebody on the other side who might be looking at it. And we're taking this and we're applying it to the firm for their own internal project management purposes. And we're building workflows and tools and interfaces so that everybody at a law firm can sign into their Viewabill accounts and know what they themselves have been working on, what their own KPIs, metrics, analytics are, but also those individuals who are managing matters, they could see the full matter and all the metrics associated with it all in real time. So it's kind of Viewabill for the firms, or Viewabill for project management is what we're working on.
Oh, yeah.
And
I can see, having been on both the partner and the associate side of that, how that could really help. I mean, as an associate, often you're worried about, am I spending too much time on this project? Am I going to get yelled at the end of the month because I went overboard? And as a partner, it's really nice to see that you could tell if somebody's struggling with a project or something that you thought might be interesting to investigate, but not for 100 hours. Could make a huge difference.
Right, and it's helpful to know, even who's working on what.
Right.
It's partners don't manage resources very well, and you're lucky if they know all the associates' names within a working group. Having the ability to see what people are working on and how that's affecting what will ultimately be that partner's customer service to their client, will improve the behavior of the associates,
yes.
But it will also create that relationship between the partners and the associates as well.
Which might help solve the email problem.
It will help, the entire chain of relationships has to go smoothly for, the full process to work. And until we make sure that law firms are able to project manage efficiently and run their firms like a business, productivity is never going to matter because nobody's thinking about productivity.
Right. Well, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of data you get out of that and what kind of results you get out of that product as well.
Thank you.
We do have to wrap up, so I wanted to say thank you, and it's been great talking to you today. To people who are watching, if you want to learn some more about Viewabill or check out a free demo, you can visit firms.viewabill.com, and we hope that you will join us at Donegal for our next interview with another legal innovator. Thanks so much.